the Council for Inclusive Education is a specialist council within the Alberta Teachers Association, we would like to start off our podcast with the ATA land acknowledgement. The Alberta Teachers Association acknowledges Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories within Alberta. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, including the many places that you are joining us from. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territories we are residing on or visiting. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Inclusive Chronicles, tips and tricks for inclusion in Alberta. I'm Kelsey Bagnall. I am the Communications Officer for the Council for Inclusive Education, and I will be today's podcast host. I'm excited to welcome two of our executive members to be part of our conversation today. So I'm going to pass it off to Jennifer first to introduce herself and then to Kathy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer. I'm the president for the Council for Inclusive Education, and I work in Central Alberta as a grade 5 teacher who is newly implementing a lot of the strategies from our book.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kathy Wiedrich, and I am the conference director for our Council for Inclusive Education. And believe it or not, as I am retired, but I'm also subbing a little bit, I am, little bits of this are trickling in even in classrooms that aren't necessarily my own, just because it's that useful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kathy and Jennifer, for introducing yourself. So today, back to that idea, this is our third episode surrounding the station rotation model and UDL, Elevating Tier 1 Instruction and Cultivate Learner Agency by Catlin Tucker. So in previous episodes, we've talked about other chapters. We talked about our favorite thing within this book, but today we are going to focus on a couple more chapters. So today we are going to focus on chapter 4, which is data-informed design. Chapter 5, which is assessment. Chapter 6, which is the teacher-led station and differentiation. And then chapter 9, so supporting executive functioning within the station rotation and how that relates to self-regulation and or co-regulation. So those are kind of, that's our topics or the chapters that we will be discussing today. So let's just hop right into it. So chapter 4 was all about data-informed decisions. And as an educator, I teach grade 1, and I feel like I am collecting data all day, every day, just through conversations and a lot through observation, especially at the grade 1 level. What about you guys? So how are you collecting data, and what does that look like for you?
I do a lot of like pre-tests or like give them challenges. Like I don't actually do a lot of testing in my classroom because like I'm grade 5. I feel that they're going to be tested enough in grade 6 and they're just not ready for it, and it just causes a lot more anxiety than needs to. So I do like what I call challenges or whatever, and so then I set for the challenge knowing that most of them are going to struggle with them, and I'm very upfront with them at that point. I'm like, you're going to struggle and that's okay because we need to see where we need fill the gaps. And so then I give them these challenges and they go through, and then that's kind of how I see where I need to focus my attention with the groups when I do work with them in different areas.
How about you, Kathy? How do you do this? Especially being in a guest teacher or substitute role, but I feel like you must still collect data even in that role.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's with more within the moment or within the day or whatever, but not, not always. And I'm in a unique position where most of the time, I may have mentioned this before in a different podcast, but most of the time I'm called actually back to the school that was my last school. And so it won't always be this way, but I'm very familiar with most of the kids. And so it does become a little bit more long term. I do participate a little bit more in the data gathering and how did the day go for so and so today, because I'm more like a regular teacher there. But still, even as a substitute guest teacher in the moment, that data gathering is takes a lot of the different forms that it would normally in a regular classroom. And the so-called soft data that is absolutely the checking in with the kids. Um, Skipping ahead a little bit to chapter 5, but when she talks about, meet the students where they are, some of the junior high sort of specific data is when it's sort of we're going to do this or that, and so go ahead now. Those were the instructions. Well, who got the instructions?
Yeah.
The data is usually like, okay, what are we, which is a great, actually, a lot of kids with executive functioning, they if they sort of didn't get the instruction verbally the first time, hello, that's half the kids. A great strategy. I mean, it's a description of the students, but still a great strategy is when you see them sort of looking around. Okay, oh, I zoned out there for a minute. What's everybody doing? So they're out, they're taking responsibility. Good for them. And then the ones who know perfectly well what you said, but they're not going to be the first to do it. So they just sit for a minute and just kind of play it cool. And then I think the one that really, some soft data that you can really avoid a lot as a teacher is many kids just have to verbalize how they really would rather be somewhere else. When they are tasked, um, oh, why do we have that? But there's real value in that. And if you jump on that right away, and that's why the idea of the stations is so great. Sometimes I think you can avoid a lot of by taking in that data, you can avoid a lot of the binary back and forth between teacher and student when the teacher jumps on that right away and says, "Oh, come on," or just let it play out for a minute, and then they move to what they're going to do, and then they're on their way.
I think about data for me and the data I use in my classroom. So I use station rotation very specifically for literacy. So my literacy block is an hour each morning, and I use station rotation for that. And what I have really done, partly because I had to for the government, is using the government assessments that we are required to do as more of that formalized data collection. So I've done that very purposely to use that data as a way to put my instruction in, especially for the student-led or the teacher-led station. So I use that data, but I also, while I'm sitting in the small group with my teacher-led station teaching, and I teach UFly as that very systematic structure during that literacy block. And when I'm doing that, I am taking constant notes of who's doing what and are they able to do what I'm asking them to do? And if they aren't, then where are we having that tricky, and using the data that I'm collecting through observations and often through conversations to make decisions about next steps for that teacher-led station specifically for me.
I
Anybody
think
else? Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
no, not a problem at all. You know, again, masquerading as an elementary school teacher for a couple of years, as I previously mentioned. Um, talking to, as you just said, Kelsey, about more formalized, I really found a running record for English or for math to just be so, they're so specific and such specific descriptors of exactly how the children are solving a problem or whatever the task is. And well, again, it was just such specific information that you could act on exactly. And so I think that UFly and things like that are just such good information. They provide such good specific information.
Yeah, I agree.
Jen, anything else you want to add to data, or do we want to hop into chapter 5?
I just think that like there's also like that formative data you get as you watch the kids, like if because sometimes I'll be at my teacher station and I'll get the kids working and then I'm able to kind of like observe what's going on in the classroom and like who's helping who's problem solving, who's developing those like 21st century competencies. I'm actually through this model able to pick out in my students a lot more than if I'm just trying to do a whole group discussion or trying to do stations where it's like here's a station, but I'm not really in active in a lot of it and stuff. So that's kind of something that I think is really valuable for collecting data using this model and stuff.
Yeah.
I think too there was our discussion last time really centered sorry, around if you can't, you don't have to dive in quickly, right? You don't have to dive into any of it quickly. Do what you can and build. And I think Aurelie and Hannah both spoke excellently about that, about just you do what you can and then you build, and they really reinforce the intentionality. But also, if you take it that slowly, you can, so that you are rarely, if ever, just, oh, I have to have other centers. If you can stop it from being everybody else has to be busy,
Hmm.
and you know, God love us. A few days, once in a while, a station, is going to be, well, this one's very intentional for this, and this one's very intentional for this. And, God love us, this one's going to be not my best station ever. But if you're planning like that, um, you can plan for so many things at once. And one of them, whatever your intent is with something, it can also often be data gathering.
So that data gathering and bridging into assessment. One thing that I think about with assessment, and I did very purposefully coming back into the classroom. So I was at head office for 4 years doing a consultant type of position. And then I came back into the classroom because my contract is up in teaching grade 1. And very purposefully, prior to the start of the school year, I created rubrics for every single outcome in grade 1. So what that looks like for me is I used AI, and Catlin talks about AI and how to use AI and prompt AI to support you with assessment. But I did that. So I put in a very specific prompt into AI, and I gave it the curricular documents from Alberta Education, and I gave them our school division's rubric or how many point scale. And I said, make me a rubric for every single outcome in that. And so I have my rubrics in my classroom just on a key ring. And as I'm sitting with kids and conferencing or having those small groups, I'm assessing where they are in the curriculum based off of what the rubric says and the 6-point rubric that my school division has. And so I am making notes on my rubric just with a Sharpie marker, and then I can erase it afterwards. And then I use that data that is my assessment data, and I put it straight into PowerSchool. And so for me, it was front heavy work in making rubrics for everything in grade one at the beginning of the school year, but it has made doing reporting so much easier because I just look at where kids are on the rubric. I have these are the rubric comments, and I copy and paste that in as my comment in PowerSchool for my assessment. And my names of my different assignments are the different parts within my rubric, and that's just the name in PowerSchool. So it was upfront work. For now that I have it in PowerSchool as each assignment, it is super easy to assess my kids and to keep parents up to date on where kids are at in the curriculum and how they're doing and progressing throughout the school year.
So Kelsey, you must be doing live reporting already.
Yes. So
So my district is moving to that next year.
yeah, so my school division has been doing real-time reporting or live reporting for the last 6 years, district-wide. And what that looks like is high school does two report cards, one at the end of semester one and one at the end of semester two. And then for us in elementary and middle school, we only do one written report card at the end of the year. We have expectations throughout the entire school year on how often we're putting ELA in and numeracy, etc. But it is having the rubrics for me has been life changing in my assessment practice. And if I teach grade one again next year, I can copy the assignments forward to next year for PowerSchool for next year. And so then the assignments are all ready, all there, and I have my rubrics ready to go.
Nice. That's good. That's I'm going to need help with that for next year.
I can help. I love prompting. Me and AI have become besties on how, and one of the things about generative AI is it gets to know who you are and what you like and what you don't like the more you prompt it. I give a lot of detail in my prompts that I give, and I also give samples. So when I created my first rubric for like science, then I gave the science rubric as the exemplar for social studies and that and so on and so forth. And so then it like AI got so much better at creating what I was expecting it to create. And then obviously that 80-20 rule where 80% AI, 20% human looking over it. So
yeah, that's really cool.
For me, the assessment part is also really tied into that data because in grade one, a lot of my assessment comes through observations and conversations because if I'm honest, a lot of grade one students do not have the written output to fairly assess through products outside of ELA. They're not going to be able to write you a paragraph about why it's important to have cultural understanding to build appreciation of diversity in our cultural communities. And so my kids can't write like that to be able to explain their thinking. And so for me, product is not my main type of assessment. A lot of my assessment is through conversations and observations, and that's why it's so helpful when I have those small groups that I have the rubrics done and I can make those notes as I go.
And that's what I like about the assessment chapter, chapter 5, is that she gives many examples of ways of representing for students, that isn't written. And you're absolutely right, Kelsey. Your littles, they have only so much writing capacity. And yet I would also say much older, many children, as we know, don't have, writing capacity. And as we always talk about, writing is hard. And so many other ways that are valuable. And then Catlin also speaks about she makes sure to put in examples of junior high and high school. And so
I
again,
love
it's not,
that.
yeah, it's not stations or only stations. There is there is support in here and ideas, etc., for all teachers of all grade levels.
Yes, I love that. That is so true. So, yeah, and like if you look on page 104, it gives you an example of a secondary English assessment standards align assess asset-based rubric. So, like she
Mhm.
gives those concrete examples of how you could set this up, but then how you're going to assess it as it happens. And one of the things that I like about her rubrics in here, especially, is it's related to that asset base. It's from a strength-based lens, and it's additive complexity versus, that deficit idea of a rubric. So I love her rubrics in here and how she ties that together.
I agree. I really like them. I like even the 4 point asset-based reciprocal teaching rubric and stuff, like just the engagement process and then how this would go and then from beginning developing proficient and mastery. I think all of these are really like good as like kind of like a starting base for teachers that are kind of like, well, how does this work? Even if you started with like kind of like cart before the horse or whatever, but you start with an assessment piece just to get an idea of what you would use it with what you're normally doing. And then it just sort of starts to help teachers utilize different things. So I think what's really important for us is like moving is like we don't want to give teachers one more thing to do, but if you're already using rubrics, look at how you can change your rubric to be an asset based as opposed to a deficit based. So
Mhm.
that when like and I think Shelley Moore talks about this in one of her training sessions that I was at. Like the entry point is what everybody can do, and that should be the passing point. If everybody can do this, you are passing, you are at the entry point. Doing more, doing more, doing more is becoming better
Mhm.
at whatever the skill is. And so you want to set up like your UDL, your Universal Design for Learning, as like, this is my entry point. This is what I want all students to know. This is what I want most students to know. And this is what I want some students to be able to do. And just kind of you keep going up from there. And I think that's really important. And if we're already using rubrics, then how do we switch our rubrics to being this lens so that you're helping your students get from where they start to where you want them to finish?
100%. I agree with that. And I have, Shelley Moore has some great 5 more minutes videos as well that talks about what Jen just talked about that I have leaned into lots of the times because my assessment looks very different than my colleagues down the hallway. And I know that. And sometimes I get this like pit in my stomach going, oh, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Like, and then I go back and watch Shelley's videos and I'm like, no, no, it's okay. You're doing what you know was right. It's okay if it looks different than your colleagues. And so I just explain why I do what I do to my families when they come in for their first set of parent teacher interviews. I have a classroom website that has a video on it explaining why I do what I do and all the rubrics. And so although it looks very different than what my colleague across the hall does, or the colleague next to me who teaches grade 1, I haven't had anybody ask me about it
Hmm.
because I have been very transparent and very forward thinking in communicating it. And I just go back and rewatch Shelley's videos and go, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. It's okay to do it different than your colleagues. And
Yeah.
that's what I do like about Catlin's book in chapter 5 as well, is it really gets you to think about different types of assessment, how to collect data for that. And it talks about formative and summative. And so for me in grade 1, my entire year is formative until the end of the year. And then I'll switch everything to summative because they have the entire year to show the outcomes. And really in grade 1, we are learning how to read and write and math, basic math skills. And that is a huge, huge focus of grade 1. So
I think if you can be, it sounds like what you are doing is authentic and communicates clearly to parents. You know, I'm looking at the elementary math assessment standards aligned asset-based rubric and just looking at the language in that, beginning for fraction decomposition, the student works on representing fractions as sums, beginning to apply decomposition strategies. Factual. Asset-based, but asset-based doesn't have to be flowery, doesn't have to be, this is
yeah,
what they can do.
yeah, yeah. 100%. And I think about how I use my assessment to continue with my student-led, or sorry, not my student-led. I have student-led conferences this week. That's why it's popping into my head. But when I think about my kids and where they're at, and my teacher-led, so like my phonics rubric here, has the assignments is letter recognition, letter sound connections, vowel understanding, word reading skills, sound manipulation. Like that's just the phonics pieces that I have as 1, 2, 3, 5 separate assignments in here. But what I can say is all of my kids are mastering, which is the top of our 6-point rubric in my school division for letter recognition. And then I look at letter sound connections in grade 1. They're expected, you're hoping that they have the 60 most frequent letter sound correspondences by the end of grade 1. So I have it gradually. And so I have, I start with, beginning here is, 25% of your 60 sounds. I don't have a single kid there. Like it's helping me plan my instruction. But what I can say then is in my teacher-led group, when I do my differentiation, and I think about chapter 6 in the differentiation, is I think about how I differentiate my groups. I differentiate not only with the process, but the content. So my one group are still working on blending consonant, vowel, consonant words or consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant words. And so they're really not at the digraph spot yet. We're still those one-to-one sound correspondence at a word level. And so I am differentiating what I'm teaching them and not pushing them to go past and be up knowing about the digraph pH says versus they're really solidifying their consonant vowel consonant 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 vowel consonant or consonant vowel consonant consonant words to be able to understand how you blend and how you take that and do that. So I am differentiating that group content wise. Same with my really, really excellent readers. I also differentiate their UFly instruction because if I had them, when I did my pre-assessment with them, they knew all their digraph sounds. And had I kept them at the digraph, they would have been bored and we would have I'd have behavior in that small group. And so I'm pushing them for long vowel sounds, which is hard. There's so many long vowel sound combinations, but they're learning those where they need to based off of the assessment. So I use the teacher-led piece there to differentiate by content. I also differentiate what I do by process because some of my kids need a lot of support